What's up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of the BREWtally Speaking Podcast, the official podcast of MetalNexus.net. I am one of your hosts, Daniel Terry, and with me, as always, is, well, I'm just going to call my co-host for this one, because he wasn't on the interview, Jonathan Beatty.
How are you doing?
Oh, man, I'm alive.
That's Flyleaf.
Oh, that's right. Man, I messed that up.
I know you love your Christian hard rock music, but
You know, it's funny. I don't as much. This was a unique interview for me because obviously, I haven't been listening to stuff like Deicide my entire life. So, we all had to start somewhere. And where did I start? I started way back in the day with some Skillet.
It was kind of funny listening to you talk to, and if you haven't guessed either by looking on your phone screen or whatever you're listening to this podcast on and seeing who the guest is, which is John Cooper of Skillet and Fight the Fury too. This is one that we got offered very randomly, and I love the thread of the email. Amy, who runs the publicity firm that we deal with a lot of the bands, just sent me an email, and the subject headline was just Skillet with a question mark. And just when you see it like that, it's very amusing to see. And I kind of was excited about it. He had been on Talk To Me podcast a little while ago, and I thought it was a pretty good interview. Seemed pretty jovial, very upbeat, and, gave good answers. And, when we do these things, something Dan has kind of hit on quite a bit is the fact that sometimes he's surprised at what I'm able to get out of people, and I think this is a great example of Dan being able to pull out some really interesting stuff with John, and kind of being a longtime Skillet fan, talking about new things and so forth. And this is one, like, when I listened to it to edit it and kind of just know what was going on so we could do this part of it, I texted my wife at one point. I was like, Dan did really good. Like, usually he doesn't like doing 20-minute interviews, but man, he really knocked this one out of the park. He kind of did like what I do, where it's like, all right, I got 20 minutes. Let's talk about as much shit as I possibly can.
Yeah, I definitely tried to slow my questions down, as that's kind of a trope that people have with me. They're like, Dan makes a 15-minute statement, and then the guest, will respond
yes.
to whatever he said, either yes, or I don't know, maybe, or I can't talk about that. And no, it wasn't like that at all. With John Cooper, he's a very, very upbeat guy. He's very positive. I just feel like he's the kind of guy that no matter how bad of a day he's having, you'll never be able to see it on his face. You can hear it in his music, but you definitely can't read it on his face. And Skillet was interesting to me because they were a band that has just gone through so many incarnations and so many different sounds over the years. And we talked about that a lot, actually, in the interview, just about how, they went from being kind of a hard rock band starting out, and then they went into kind of more of an industrial techno direction. They ended up moving out of that and kind of back into the hard rock sound. And it was a little bit more revitalized. And I always just kind of wondered what his mindset was going into all of that and going through the changes and being stuck on a Christian record label and, kind of feeling like maybe the creativity was limited in a way to where they couldn't go in a direction that they kind of go in now that they're kind of more of a crossover. I consider them to be like a crossover mainstream act at this point.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you're playing, mini arenas and so forth, or, playing arenas outright, and you're playing with the likes of a Breaking Benjamin and so forth, and I think maybe there was a Bad Wolves tour in there too when they had them open or something. I'm not sure, but I mean, at this point, Skillet, I think, is as big of a commercial radio rock band as there possibly is that also has ties to the Christian community. I think I had sent to you in a text or something about how I've always been aware of Skillet because they used to play out here at this festival, and I don't know, I still don't remember what it's called, but I just know that Skillet typically was like the headliner, but it was like a big Christian music festival thing that comes around Christmas time.
Winter Jam.
Yeah, that's it. And I always thought it was fucking Monster Trucks.
No, Winter Jam was a Christian rock festival, and yeah, Skillet was always kind of the headliner. And they actually brought in a lot of people from the community that way. I think the interesting thing about Skillet is they're the ultimate success story in that they started back in 93 or something like that and literally worked as hard as they could to get to where they're at now. They don't have the, well, we sent a demo and then Sharon Osbourne heard it and then we became huge or something like that. It wasn't like that. With Skillet, it was just We're going to go out. We're going to be rock and roll. We're going to play anywhere we're allowed to play. And, he kind of got into that a little bit in the interview about, how they were so afraid whenever they went in their hard rock direction that they're more famous for now, that they thought that was going to be career suicide. That they'd spent so much time trying to build on the sound that they had transitioned into. The transitioning out of it just seemed like crazy.
Now, it's funny, I know you and I have like a mutual love for a lot of the same era of music, that late 90s, early 2000s kind of metalcore, and a lot of it, obviously being like Christian tinged with Solid State and Tooth and Nail and so forth. But the thing that's kind of interesting to me in thinking about it, and, I don't think I've even asked you this, I know we've touched on it a little bit with the whole As I Lay Dying thing, which is, just how much of the backlash and shit is because the band used to identify as a Christian band, so on and so forth. But now, adversely, and the only bands I can really think of that have done this, although this band, the main influence that I'm thinking of, has always maintained their values, but, you look at a band like POD, that's one of the few bands I can think of that crossed over into commercial rock radio, and is there much of a backlash from the Christian rock fans or whatever when a band starts achieving success like it is when your favorite underground metal band starts getting some notoriety and you're like, fuck, man, like, no, you sold out? Like, is it still the same, or are Christian fans kind of more understanding and be like, yes, go, spread the gospel of the things that we love about you and embracing the fact that their favorite thing is getting bigger?
I think for Skillet specifically, they're definitely kind of immune to a lot of that.
Oh, really?
I've noticed because, I don't really hear that many people trash talking to Skillet. I mean, obviously there's always going to be that one guy, in the Facebook comments or something like that. But even then, I've noticed even the people that don't talk highly of Skillet now are usually just people that were fans of the band and either didn't like a musical change that they made, and there are some people out there that are so religiously zealous that no matter what, like if they somehow perceive that the band has compromised in their message or in their mission or whatever, like it's never going to be good enough. But I think that really encompasses like less than 1% of the amount of people that really listen to the band. And yeah, I definitely don't see that with Skillet as much. I mean, there's going to be guys like me that are like, hey guys, you guys used to be heavier, why don't you guys beef it up a little bit? But then he comes out with Fight the Fury after that, which is kind of more of a realization of that. So in a certain sense, they're still listening to that fan, and so, I mean, you got to give them that.
Do you ever envision, I mean, granted, we only have one Fight the Fury record, but in listening to a couple of interviews that John has done, it sounds like he is a more old school metal fan, between like Metallica and Megadeth and so on and so forth. They're, more so thrash metal.
Yeah.
Do you think if we get more Fight the Fury stuff that we're going to kind of see a Stone Sour Slipknot thing where the lines are a little bit blurred between the projects and you're just like, well,
I think John's voice is very pop-centered, and I'm not saying that as a bad thing. I mean, obviously he's far more successful doing that than I am at anything that I've ever done. I can say that I think that John is he has such a distinct voice that I think, especially with the Fight the Fury songs that we have out now, there's people that are going to be like, wow, this sounds like old Skillet. This sounds like, their heavier stuff. It's obviously harder than that even, but I could see people having trouble distinguishing. I think he's going to have to really try hard with another release with Fight the Fury to really differentiate it from the Skillet sound. But I think that's just a growing pain. Like recently on Discography Discussion, we were talking about Devil Driver and how Dez on the first Devil Driver album still sounded like Coal Chamber Dez.
Yeah. Yep.
And I think it's just the same thing. It's like, well, he's been doing the Skillet thing for so long that, yeah, sure, he's going to put out a heavier project, but it's still going to sound like Skillet because, number one, it's him singing, and he has a very distinct voice. And but at the same time, I think over time we're going to start seeing them incorporate different elements into it. I mean, I would love to hear Fight the Fury throw in some older thrash influences. and stuff like that, or maybe even take a swing that nobody would be expecting, which would be to double down on those industrial elements that Skillet used to have. Some of the bands that he talked about in the interview, like Rob Zombie and Marilyn Manson, Fear Factory, Marilyn Manson, stuff like that. Like I could see him taking the band in that type of heavy direction. Which I think would be almost more interesting than maybe them going like towards more of a metalcore sound or whatever's popular now. But I think any project that he's involved in is going to have pop hooks, because that's just who he is as a songwriter.
And I think this is as good a time as any to get into your conversation with John Cooper of Skillet. So we will talk to you after that.
I have the pleasure this early afternoon of talking to John Cooper of Skillet. How are you doing this afternoon?
Dude, I'm awesome. Great to be chatting with you.
Yeah, man. I just got done. I listened about 3 or 4 times. You guys just dropped a new single on. Well, it was on Friday, but I was a little late to the party, so I had to pull it up and give it a listen. This song was called "You Ain't Ready," and it's obviously for your new album "Victorious," which is coming out in 2 days.
You got it. I'm so ready for this record to come out. Oh my gosh, you hear that? Somebody opened their car without there you go. They found their alarm button.
Oh no.
Now this is rock and roll. People listening like, what are they doing? Yep, this is rock and roll interview. Yeah, so pumped about the new record and so pumped about the new single. Ready to have this album out. Oh, you're kidding me. Listen to this guy. This guy can't figure out his Ford.
Luckily, I can't really hear it on my end, so the listeners won't.
Oh, good.
Yeah, their ears aren't going to get blasted.
What's going on?
Right.
I assumed it'd be like super loud through there. There's somebody's like, I don't understand how to use my lock button.
Right. No, you're good. You're good. Well, I mean, between that and my kids are upstairs just tearing the place apart. So,
Yep. I hear you on that.
So, yeah, rock and roll interview for sure. We got kids and car alarms and all kinds of chaos going on. Well, one thing that I noticed about You Ain't Ready is that it had a little bit more of an aggressive guitar crunch to it, something that I kind of haven't heard from. I mean, obviously the guitars are always crunchy and in your face, but
Sure.
it sounds to me like maybe you guys might be going in a little bit more of an aggressive direction with this new record.
Yeah, I think that's probably the case. I think Corey, which is my wife and my guitar player, and she does our producing. Me and her produced the record ourselves, and I think because of that, I think we were able just to kind of do a little bit more what we wanted to. And sometimes when you produce records with people, we have our own sound, but the more other people get involved, it can tend to get more polished as it gets involved. Sometimes like, oh, we're going to make this sound even better than the last one, and then it just gets a little tamer and tamer and tamer. And it's not to say that I don't like, the records we release, because I always do. We try to make it raw, but this one was like, we're producing ourselves. We want this to be a little more, a little more teeth and a little more gut punching. And so, yeah, the guitar tones are a little bit more in your face. I would say they're a little crunchier personally, and we were able to kind of just take more time because you're not wasting anyone else's time. It's okay to waste your own time, but when you're in a studio paying a bunch of money, it's like, oh crap, we just need to hurry up and get this thing recorded. This one was kind of fun, and so I think the overall project just feels a little bit more. It feels meaner. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, and that's cool. It's fun seeing that output. I know you've always been the self-proclaimed metal guy in Skillet, so I'm always like, no. Whenever I hear something super polished or whatever, I'm like, oh, just wait a few tracks. It's gonna get
right.
It's gonna get dirty. Eventually.
Yeah. Yeah,
I have to admit I'm a pretty old school panhead, so to speak, and so
awesome.
my very first favorite song by Skillet was a song called "I Can."
Oh man,
yeah,
God, way back. I love it.
Yeah, I probably would have been about 12 or 13 years old, seeing you guys do the church runs and all that back in the day, and So yeah, whenever the interview landed, I was like, oh yeah, dude, we got to get in and talk.
That's awesome.
And one of the things that I kind of wanted to get into, and we will talk about your Victorious Sky tour here in a little bit, but kind of go back a little bit, well, a long bit actually, and just kind of talk about the different sounds of Skillet. We'd had the first album, which was a rock album, which is actually, it's funny, you look at your first album is almost in a certain sense more in line with what you guys are doing now, at least for that time. And so we'd gone from a hard rock sound and into a more electronic rock sound, and then into kind of more of what you guys are doing now, which is more of a hard rock, all around sort of sound. I guess my question for you is, what was it like navigating through all of that and trying to, was it difficult to kind of try to find that sound that you knew was going to resonate with people?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things. One thing is that it's fun to try new stuff. Now, if I was Metallica or AC/DC, if I kind of, created the wheel like one of those bands did, I probably wouldn't be looking to change anything. But, the truth is that most of the rest of all of us bands are mortals, and we kind of got to try new stuff to keep fresh. And I think for me, it was like, I want to try something new, but at the same time, I would like to find something unique about the band that when people hear it, they go, bam, that's Skillet. That sounds good. And I think in just kind of, wading through trying electronics was a lot of fun, and I loved all of that. Some industrial influences there, and you still pick up on that on Skillet records today, obviously. The electronics is a little bit that's kind of what we've carved out our position in. We're a hard rock band, but we've always been open to embracing electronics and symphonies and strings and things like that. And I think that kind of skews the band's sound a little bit more modern. And I think that's why there's maybe a lot of young fans that go like, I don't typically love rock music, but I love Skillet. And we get a lot of that. Skillet's like a gateway metal band for a lot of bands, a lot of fans, excuse me. And I think that's kind of cool because we do, we can go play with Metallica or we can play with Fall Out Boy. And I think that's kind of a unique thing about the band.
Right, yeah, and having such a diverse back catalog, you can very carefully pick songs that are going to resonate with the crowd that you're playing with. I guess one of the things too is, did it ever feel like, whenever you were to switch a sound, whenever you guys transitioned, most notably from the more industrial electronic sound into the hard rock, did that ever almost feel like starting over?
I think the more Skillet went, what kind of became a big part of like the identity of the band wasn't necessarily like a particular sound or a particular direction. After a handful of records, I'd say 4 or 5 records, what kind of became the identity was like the feeling of the band. It was the feeling of the lyrics, the feeling of this kind of positive community. That's what we always would get from fans. And I would say in a certain sense, obviously we're no U2, but U2 is kind of like that too. They could do a lot of different things, but as soon as you hear Bono singing, it kind of has that U2 feeling,
Sure.
Coldplay is a similar band in that respect. And I think Skillet was a little like that too. So it didn't necessarily feel like starting over, but it did have like that freshness. And I like that because a lot of people go, oh man, I heard the new so-and-so record. It sounds just like the old one. And,
right.
There's a lot of complaints from some people about certain bands that kind of never really experimented. They just keep doing the same thing over and over. And it kind of seems stale. And especially if you're a band that doesn't have huge radio support, like for instance, I don't want to name any bands because it might sound like I'm talking bad about somebody, which I'm not intending
Sure.
to, but whatever band comes out with a new thing, even if people are like, oh, it sounds exactly like their last one. If they were big at rock radio last time, they probably will be this time too.
Right.
They're going to get played, Nobody's going to not play the new Godsmack record. That's a good example.
Right, yeah, absolutely.
And that's not a diss on Godsmack. It's great. They got their sound. They write hit songs. They get played at radio. And even if people go, oh, it's not really any different, it doesn't matter. They get played. Skillet did not get played at radio for 12 years. And so we had to kind of keep creating a new story, a new reason to get people excited and go, holy crap, they started something brand new. And I liked the last one. I might like this even better because it had that freshness. And I kind of enjoyed that. It kind of, to me, felt like just an exciting journey of what Skillet was going to try next.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, the biggest change, or the biggest thing that caught my ear initially was, whenever you guys did move, from the Alien Youth sound to the Collide sound, that guitar crunch that you guys nailed on that Collide album is still one of the heaviest, like, hard rock guitar. Like, it's like it's actually a couple steps over the line between hard rock and metal, and and that was the biggest thing that you guys kind of tried to maintain throughout. That Skillet went from more of a electronics driven band to a very hard driving guitar based band. Is it ever hard? Because I know you guys kind of skirted the line between hard rock and metal, and you guys kind of always do that. Is it ever hard to hold that aggressiveness back a little bit, as you don't want to necessarily go so heavy that everybody's just stopping and looking at you? Like at the end of Back to the Future, where he melts everybody's faces
His guitar
off.
solo?
Yeah, and they're all just standing, and he's
that.
like, "Oh, I guess you guys aren't ready for that yet." Are you ever afraid of getting so aggressive that you reach that?
Not really. I mean, for me, it's just kind of about, I just want to know that I have songs that connect, songs that people would want to hear a lot. Like, for instance, like, I'm a big fan of Five Finger Death Punch. It's kind of like super heavy but kind of poppy, at the same time. They got these great pop hooks. And so I kind of don't mind, I like the idea that it would be really aggressive and really in your face, but really I just want to have the right songs. And so we kind of just try to massage the music to fit the song. And then again, that was what was fun about producing this one, is that there are some songs like You Ain't Ready or like Legendary that we could have made not as heavy, because they're actually quite poppy in terms of the vocals. But instead of kind of dumbing it down, and taking off the edge to it to make it very broad, we decided to kind of maybe pump it up a little bit and make it feel like a really heavy rock song, even though the vocals are very pop, very hooky. You can imagine crowds singing them and chanting them. And again, that's kind of in line with what I hear Five Finger doing, and some of my favorites, Breaking Benjamin, bands like that.
Yeah, I definitely could see that, because it's a lot of fun to have, to kind of just have that feeling that, like, okay, everybody's on board with this, and I think that opens up the door maybe a little bit for you to be more experimental musically, because the vocals are there,
Sure.
The songs are there, people can still sing. I think that's the hard balancing point, is like, can people still sing it, but we're also challenging ourselves musically.
Yeah, I think the most we did that on this record was on the song Save Me. And that is probably the most, in terms of what you're talking about, probably the most we've done that in probably 3 records would be this song Save Me. And that was intentional. I was thinking, it's such a pop hook. It's so memorable. It's catchy. It's melodic. And let's just make the music really interesting. There's like a lot of double kick on the chorus and a lot of like palm muting on the guitars. And it's got this bridge that's really, it's not really prog, but it's got like a great, drop to it. That's I don't know, a little bit like something, like I say, Five Finger might do, or even old Rage Against the Machine, a little bit of that kind of riff to it. And it was fun to kind of experiment and show off a little on that, show our metal chops a little on that song.
Well, and speaking of metal chops, kind of what I'm getting at too is, what is the balance? And I know you briefly talked about this on the Lead Singer Syndrome podcast that you were on relatively recently, and what the balance between you now having to split your songwriting between 2 bands, with you've got Skillet, is your main, and then you've got Fight the Fury. Is that kind of your way of balancing the sounds out, even because with Fight the Fury, there doesn't have to be any restrictions, as far as heaviness and aggressiveness goes.
Yeah, that's right. Fight the Fury was fun because sometimes I do write songs that I'm like, man, I really like this, and I think Skillet could do it, but it might just be a little much. My Demons was a Fight the Fury song, and that's the song that I wrote for Skillet originally, and then it just never really happened. It was just too much. It was too heavy. It was too screamy, and I thought, it'd be really cool to have a project where I can do anything I want to do and scream, and you could start the song with a guitar solo if you wanted, like old school Metallica, you know, like Ride the Lightning, you know, it could be a 6-minute song and the first minute and a half is a guitar solo. That stuff's really fun. And our fans respond really well to Skillet does that kind of stuff live, you know, not on our records, but live we do it and our fans enjoy it. So I thought, why not have a project that kind of delves into that? And I kind of thought for all those old Skillet Collide fans that want Skillet to be like super heavy, maybe they'd love Fight the Fury. So it's actually really fun. It's not stressful. It's actually the opposite. It's really a release, and it's a lot of fun to play live.
Yeah, I can imagine just being able to kind of get up there and go off, you know?
Yeah, totally go off and show off too. It's people are like, "Oh my gosh, I didn't know you could play bass," and I'm like, "Yeah, I'm a bass player."
I've been playing bass forever. Yeah,
yeah.
So you know, and to kind of go in a little bit of a different direction, you know, when Skillet first came out, and again, I don't think this was a decision that you or the band had made, but was pushed more heavily by the so-called Christian music industry. And I say so-called because it's just a totally different thing than I think it was probably intended to be. But, you know, is it easier now, and I would assume it is just from listening to the records, but is it easier now to experiment with new sounds and ideas and to go into certain directions lyrically than maybe it was whenever you had a record, when you were on a record label that was more focused on, you know, ministry-based music?
Oh, yes, certainly. I mean, and that's not a diss on the Christian music industry or the labels, really. It's just kind of like what it is. And you know, I think without Skillet being, you know, what I just call a rock act, meaning a secular, you know, crossover rock act. Without that, you know, I don't even know if Skillet would be around anymore because there's just not much of a platform anymore in Christian music for rock. So I think that Skillet is more known now as a rock act, I would say, than I mean, we're known as Christians, of course, and that we came from here, but we're really just known as a rock act. And I think that that's cool because I never wanted to only sing to Christian people, never wanted to only be in the Christian music industry. I wanted to just make music for all kinds of people. And because I always had this view that music brings people together, no matter where you come from, color, skin, religion, politics, all that doesn't really matter when it comes to singing a song about love, you know, or going to the prom, you know, going to the prom and remembering that first date you had and the song that was playing on your first date, you know, that's kind of what music does for me. But I wanted the freedom to be able to sing about things that matter to me. And sometimes those songs are about God and my relationship with God, or what I think about the world and how it goes through my worldview, you know, spiritually. So I'm not disappointed in my journey. I've loved it, but I never wanted to be, you know, tied down only to the Christian music industry. I just wanted to make music for all kinds of people.
Sure. And I totally get that. And yeah, it's not really a diss on the industry. They just kind of do what they do, you know?
That's right. That's a good way to say it.
Yeah.
They do what they do. That's right.
And you're right about that. That's something I haven't really thought about until you said it, that there isn't really a lot in that industry anymore for rock bands. It's kind of weird how it's the soft worship music, or it's like the super brutal, you know, heavy bands. Like they found this weird divide there. And so for a band,
yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Yeah. Well, they kind of had that, like, it kind of started with Tooth and Nail records way back in the day, and then it kind of morphed into what I always call the Hot Topic hardcore bands, like Norma Jean and As I Lay Dying, and there's these like brutal young hardcore metal bands, Devil Wears Prada, and then you find out somebody's like, yeah, I think they're a Christian band. You're like, what? Yeah, I didn't know that. I thought they were, you know, Hot Topic hardcore. It's kind of strange, but these days that's a very, very small niche, and it's mainly, as you said, worship music in the Christian music scene now, mainly worship music.
Yeah, and that's good. I mean, that those bands get their distribution and get, you know, the stuff that they need. But yeah, to kind of move off that, I guess one of the things, well, I'll just say one last thing about it. That's one thing I've noticed listening to the records is, you know, the quote unquote Christian music era of Skillet, you know, which would have been like before Collide, was, very worshipful and obviously very sincere. Like I don't doubt that there was sincerity in that stuff as well. But it was very refreshing to hear, like, lyrically, it started to get, and I don't even want to use the word negative because I would never describe Skillet as a negative band. But it definitely, like, starting to deal with issues that just the general populace at large is dealing with, versus just a small sector of the
I agree
community.
with that. Yeah, I agree with that. That was something that when we were making Collide, I was like, hey, you know what? I love where I came from. I love the Christian music industry, but we're not going to keep getting bigger here. And I just want to make a really great rock album and not have to worry about any of the strictures of all the other stuff. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But I want to make a real rock album that all kinds of people can relate to. And honestly, we didn't think it was going to work. But amazingly enough, we made the record. And, Atlantic Records ended up picking it up. But we didn't know that going into it. We were making the record knowing that there's a possibility this could be the career killer and for our band. And that was all right. I wanted to go out with a bang. And in the end, other things were meant to be.
Yeah, you couldn't have been more wrong about that. Yeah, it actually was your guys' springboard into where you're at now. And just from that Collide record, which was just like a heavy, dirty record, you guys were able to take that sound and refine it even further, and that that's the most interesting thing about it is how you were able to go, to take that dingy sound, make it, refine it even further, and have now taken that sound and split it into two bands for people to listen to.
Right.
So expansion is the way that it is the way of the world, right?
Yeah, that's right.
But before I forget, I have to ask you about this tour that you have with Alter Bridge and Dirty Honey called the Victorious Sky Tour. Is this so? When does this kick off, or is it you're not already on?
All right.
Are you?
Well, first I'll give a little plug. We're actually leaving on a tour called Victorious War Tour that is going to be going in about 10 days from now, and that is with Seven Dust and Pop Evil and Devour the Day, and we're doing about 20 dates on that run, and then we go straight from that run into the Victorious Sky Tour, which is with, as you mentioned, Alter Bridge and Dirty Honey. So and then straight from there to Europe. So we got a pretty busy year.
Yeah, that's one of the questions I was going to ask you. Is do you guys ever take breaks? It just seems like all the time. I mean, I have never gone to the Skillet Facebook page and not seen the little icon that pops up that says on tour.
Yeah, we work really, really hard, and that's kind of how we cut our teeth, because as I said, we didn't have radio for a long time. We couldn't get played to save our lives, and so we just had to keep touring, creating a name for ourselves from live shows, putting on great performances, giving the fans time, trying to make something special of a live concert, enough that people would go, man, I want to see that again, and bring my friend, and that's how, we ended up selling a gold record on Comatose without any radio hits. And that was a 10 years of road touring and word of mouth and trying to make better records. And Collide was a hit for us. And then when Comatose came out, it just exploded and changed our lives. So we owe our fans a lot, but because of that touring, we just we're used to it, and we work really hard.
Yeah, definitely. Well, with the last couple of minutes here, I'm gonna ask, with you being the metal guy, I'm predominantly a metal guy too. So like all the, the Metallica, the Five Finger Death Punch. What metal bands are you most excited about, or that you listen to currently? It doesn't even have to be a new band or anything. Just if John Cooper had a definitive playlist of bands you should make a playlist out of, what would they be?
Yeah, sure. Metallica, Five Finger. I'm going to put Breaking Benjamin in the metal category, because I like them, and it's kind of right in that line between metal. I mean, they're heavier and darker than us, but they're not necessarily like hyper energy, but it's got that like metal feeling, almost like Tool. If I could expand it out even further, I would say things like Rob Zombie and Manson. There's more, but I can't all of a sudden. All of a sudden I'm having a hard time thinking of them. But there's more. Well, those are probably like my favorites. So that'd be on my favorites list.
So you're telling me that if I put all these bands into a playlist and shuffle them, then in 6 months I'll be able to write songs just like Skillet. No,
yeah, that's exactly right.
You're like,
yeah. I mean, I don't know how much all those bands are influential on Skillet, but it is, because it all kind of goes into the pot. Obviously you wouldn't listen to Skillet and go, oh my gosh, sounds like Metallica. It's not really like that, but it's certainly all in the pot.
Yeah. No, that's cool. I I always love throwing that out there. It's like, yeah, sure, buddy, sit down and write some songs, and we'll see how it goes.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, John, I really appreciate you taking the time out to talk to me today. It's definitely a lot of fun and answered a lot of questions I had just as a longtime Skillet listener. I've been through, whenever you've been listening to that long, you almost feel like you're taking the journey with the band, and
Sure.
It's always fun to see it grow. Are there any songs off of Victorious that you want to highlight that you think might be the biggest hits for maybe not hits necessarily, but just hits to you?
Yeah, let's see. We talked about Save Me. That would be one I definitely would highlight, because to me that's one that goes back to the Collide and Comatose era, and I think that like our hardcore fans that have been with us for a long time, I think they're going to love that one, because it kind of harkens back to that time period, and it's a little bit more gothic in the lyrics. The lyrics are darker subject matter and aggressive, so that's one that's very special to me for that reason. Victorious, the song, is my favorite song on the record, and in some ways it also reminds me of the Comatose era with the big symphony and that kind of thing. Like when you hear it, you go, oh, that sounds like Skillet. It has that thing to it, even though it's a ballad. It's not super heavy, but it's more of a ballad feel, but it has that uplifting, you feel like that you can face the world kind of feeling to it for the song Victorious. And it's special to me for lots of reasons. It also deals with, people that are struggling with depression and wanting to encourage people to believe, to have hope. And those things are really important to me. So maybe I'd probably highlight it for that reason. Me and my wife did all the string arrangements, the orchestra arrangements for that. So that was kind of fun.
Yeah, it's always been a staple of the sound. Have you guys ever thought about, I always say thought about like it's financially feasible all the time, but have you guys ever thought about doing like what Metallica did and actually performing with a live symphony?
Yeah, we have. I think you never know. I have a feeling that we will do it at some point, even if it's for like select shows. So that has come up, and nothing would surprise me.
Alrighty, well, I'm going to go ahead and get off of here, let you get back to your day, but I just wanted to say thank you so much for doing the interview today, and we'll look forward to seeing you. It looks like you guys are coming here to St. Louis on the Alter Bridge tour in October, so get to come by and see all these new songs live.
I love it. Yeah, come out and say hey, dude.
We'll absolutely do that.
All right, I appreciate it.
All righty, thanks, John, so much. You take care of yourself.
Yeah, you too, buddy. Later.
And that was my chat with John Cooper of Skillet. We had a fun time. It was around lunchtime, so my stomach was definitely gurgling towards the end of it.
You didn't have a skillet full of food?
I did not. That would have been great if I'd have stopped off at like Denny's and got the breakfast skillet and been like, all right, let's go, guys. Set my computer up right there at the Denny's.
I've definitely have done some podcasts in some interesting places. I just don't tell everyone about it.
We wouldn't want that. I think one time you did a Seven Dust interview in a closet, if I'm not mistaken.
Wasn't necessarily a closet. My old job apparently didn't like the fact that I kept using their conference room that they never used. They used it like once a week for like 40 minutes. And then it was just basically an empty room that no one ever used. So I constantly used it to do interviews. And then someone was like, oh, you should find someone else to go do that in case we need to use the conference room. And so the only place I could go where people weren't having lunch and I felt rude, impeding on someone's lunch while they were trying to watch TV and such, was like this weird broom closet-y type thing that didn't have a ceiling at my old job. So it's like you can still hear at times the presses and stuff running. And so it just turned into a thing where I was like, well, I guess this is a thing that's happening now.
Yeah, I remember that being really funny because you were like, I think you even told him that you were in a closet, and he was just like, oh, okay, that's cool.
I did it for Tremonti.
Well, speaking of Seven Dust, I believe Skillet is going to be on tour with Seven Dust.
Yeah,
which I was surprised by. I didn't realize that. I knew that they had a tour coming up with Godsmack, but if I'd looked a little bit further. Or a little bit closer, realizing that we're going out with Seven Dust, which I think that'd be a really cool show. And to my point about Skillet being able to bust out heavier stuff, they've got a catalog now to where they can play a set with Seven Dust and it be aggressive, and then they can go out and they can play, more for the radio rock crowd.
Well, I think even adversely, Seven Dust could do the same. They have enough kind of more radio hits too. I think it's one of those things. A lot of people, I think, whether you're a Skillet fan or you're a Seven Dust fan, I don't know that there's a ton of crossover, honestly. But it is one of those things that I don't think it's so drastically like, oh my god, I can't believe that. But it's like, I think fans, if you don't know who Seven Dust is because you're a Skillet fan, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised by Seven Dust. And adversely, I think if you are a Seven Dust fan and don't really know much about Skillet, you probably will be pretty surprised by Skillet's set. So I think it's a good matching and a good pairing for a tour. And, I guess when you have two bands that have been around for almost
a million
20 plus years, and have all these records and success and so forth, that it's just inevitable that, you guys are going to cross paths at some point and hopefully do a tour.
Yeah, I thought it was a lot of fun getting to ask him because it's one of those things where I think a lot of people don't associate Skillet with metal necessarily. And all I kept hearing in these other interviews with John was that, he's like, yeah, I'm the metal guy in Skillet. I listen to the heavy stuff and all that. And that's why I kind of wanted to get to the bottom of that because I guess I always wanted to know, like, how heavy are we talking? Is John Cooper like rocking some Acacia Strain or something like we don't know about it or what's going on with that? And I think it's interesting too that all the bands that he picked, you can kind of hear them in the Skillet sound.
Yeah. So two things actually. Let's go on the more positive one. What are you drinking tonight?
Oh, me? I've got some Logboat Snapper. It's kind of my go-to, and it's fun. I actually recently came into possession of some actual like tap label, like the wooden tap labels. Okay. So I've got a couple of Logboats. I've got one for Bobber and I've got one for Snapper. So unfortunately, I don't have a keg system at my house, so I'm gonna have to just hang those on my wall as kind of mementos. But I definitely love Snapper. I've gone on and on about it and how it's kind of become a replacement for Space Dust for me. Number one, because it's $2 cheaper, and it's a little bit more crisp. Whereas you almost have to be in a certain mood to drink something like Space Dust. It's just very hardcore, and so I definitely enjoy Snapper just because it's got more of a crisp taste. I don't know if Logboat's gone too far outside of St. Louis. I know Zayo came to town a couple of days ago. I definitely sent them home with some Logboat, and yeah, so I've yet to hear the progress report on that to see if they enjoyed it or not.
I'm currently drinking one of the last of my Sam Adams Oktoberfests. Friend of the podcast, Adam Morgan of Hopesball. He and I share an affinity for all things Oktoberfest fall beers. Always we share it. So whenever I see he's got one, I'm like, fuck, I know there's got to be some somewhere around me. So he posted that he had gotten some Sam Adams, and typically they're the first to get out their Oktoberfest out of most of the bigger breweries. And I went to a store probably 40 minutes after I saw Adam's post, and I found a 6-pack.
Nice.
And so I bought one. And, Adam and I are actually talking about this on his post about the same beer. It's not the best Oktoberfest you're ever going to have, but like I said, for the fact that it's a such a widely distributed beer, the fact that, and Sam Adams actually is pretty good about this with all of their seasonal beers and so forth, they do a really good job of having a consistently good seasonal beer that tastes good. I mean, their cherry wheat is always great. I don't drink a ton of it just because I kind of overdid it a couple years ago. But it's a great beer. Put some real cherries in there at the bottom of your beer on an off draft. It's so fucking good on a hot day. But no, like Sam Adams, for being a pretty mainstream brewery, does a good job of making really interesting, good seasonal beers. And Oktoberfest is one of them. However, there's, I think Adam and I both are fans of this brand, Eidinger. And they have a Margin-style Oktoberfest that is probably one of my favorites. There used to be a company here. It was, I think it was just Michigan Brewing. And they used to have a beer called Screaming Pumpkin. They were the same company that made Badass Beer, the Kid Rock beer. And it was stupidly good, but then they went under and then sold all their recipes to various companies. And I forget who makes Screaming Pumpkin now. But the best pumpkin beer, and I cannot wait to go get it, is the Pumpkin. But they have an Imperial Pumpkin called the Warlock. And the Warlock is just like drinking basically a pumpkin pie. It is so fucking good. It's smooth. Oh, I can't wait to have
it. It sounds dangerous.
It's so good. Like to the point where like my wife and I will drive an hour down to Kalamazoo to go get it on draft at this one bar that has like 40 different craft beers on draft at any given point. It is stupidly good. So this is one of my favorite seasons for a lot of reasons, weather-wise and so forth, but especially the beer. You can't go wrong with good like fall beer.
Yeah, totally. I'm a big fan. Well, it's funny. I don't even know if I could talk about this because my buddy Mike Yaney makes his own seasonal beers. He basically brews his own beer, which I know we all have a buddy out there that's like, oh yeah, I brew my own beer or whatever. This guy is just a beautiful human being, and he's way too humble because his beer is like really delicious. And we're always like, dude, seriously, like I will set you up with a business plan. We will get you a building, give you a microbrew. You know what I mean? You could do this for a living, And he's always like, no, it's fine. I like giving it to my friends and, all this stuff or whatever. And this guy makes a pumpkin beer that is literally like you said, John, like it's also like drinking a pumpkin pie. Yeah. And it's stupidly alcohol rich. So it's one of those, like you really, even for somebody like me, I can usually only have like one of them because it's so sweet. And it's like almost... It's thick like an imperial stout without being that, if that makes sense. It's really hard to describe because I haven't had it since last October. So once he gets a batch of it done, I can kind of feature it on the show, and much to his chagrin, I'll be like, dude, and if you want to order it, email this dude. Like
I'll put it in my order now, just like people do for their seasonal pies.
Totally. So we're beating around the bush. So
Nope, hold on. So actually, there's something else that's it's topical, and you hit on it when you mentioned the band name. But I do kind of want to talk about this, and we kind of went on a long-winded rant recently, and in listening back to it, I kind of liked that we did that because we don't do it that often. So you'd mentioned the Acacia strain, and saying if do you think John like listens to like something that heavy? In recent news, as of when we're recording this, probably in the last, I think, 4 days, if you have seen any metal sites or anything like that, or like heavy, any rock sites and so forth, apparently one of the mass shootings, the shooter was wearing an Acacia strain hoodie. I don't know if it's been officially confirmed that he was wearing an Acacia strain hoodie, but regardless, that's what everyone already started reporting. And news spread like wildfire that, this shooter is wearing an Acacia strain hoodie, and the band's got violent lyrics and all this kind of stuff because it was for their song Ramirez. And the band actually posted, I think it was on the Facebook page, or someone posted it regardless, the first set that the band had played since all that happened. And Vincent was just like, we do this, because you all are here, and, like this, we do this to give you guys a place to come and have an outlet for anything you're going through and to have fun and all this kind of stuff. And, it was really touching. And then, they'd play some of like the most brutal shit ever.
Right. Of course.
But it was one of those things that it's like, I'm kind of getting tired of the narrative of like, oh, well, they were wearing a metal thing, so must be, it's the music that's doing it. And it's like, haven't we figured out that that's not what fucking is happening? It's not the music, it's not the video games. Like, I'm sure there's a part of it that maybe is an inkling, like just the most minute part of it is, but I've been listening to metal music for a long fucking time. I can't tell you how many violent video games I've played in my 35 years of being alive. And you know what I've never done? Gotten into a fight. I've never killed anybody. Now, I'm not going to sit there and tell you I don't put in Grand Theft Auto and mow down a bunch of fucking people with a car, with guns, whatever. But you know what? That's kind of what those games are for, is to just be so way out there and be like, I would never do this. But in this made-up fictitious world where shit it's not real, I can live this alternate fantasy. I don't even want to call it a fantasy because that gives it too much credence. I can do this thing that I would never do because I know that that's not an okay thing to do, because I value life. I value other people. And so the fact that and for the most part, everyone on the comment section was definitely in agreement with kind of what I'm saying, but I'm just tired of this fucking narrative that it's like, oh, he was wearing a metal shirt. Of course, obviously.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate that it was the lyrics from Ramirez, which is one of their more
brutal songs.
Very brutal lyrically and musically. And I think, I largely agree with what you said, John, that there's no, and I want to take it more logical. There's never been a study done that has proven any sort of link between violent behavior and media consumption. And I think the problem is you can say, music can be violent, can be an outburst. There's a lot of bands I listen to and I read the lyrics and I'm like, these are coming from a place of hate. But at the same time, like, what's better? You taking that hate out on somebody in real life, or you just channeling that hate into a creative endeavor, like being in a band and writing lyrics and, so even if your lyrics and your music comes from a hateful place, I think it's the most positive way of dealing with that emotion versus going out in the real world and killing somebody or all this stuff. And then, it goes even more meta than that, because people are like, well, what about these bands, Cannibal Corpse, that glorify, gore and death and all that stuff? It's like, you've never bought a ticket to go see a horror movie before?
Right. Absolutely.
And why do you do that? Because it's kind of fun to be scared. It's kind of fun to have that, like, it's not really happening sort of thing, and I wish I had the quote in front of me right now of somebody from Cannibal Corpse being like, dude, we talk about all this stuff or whatever. He's like, dude, but if I saw any of this stuff in real life, it would like ruin me forever. Like, and you just, it all just reminds me of that whole Dee Snider deal. He shows up in front of all these suits and they're like, we're going to tear him apart. And of course, Dee Snider being the, one of the most articulate metal musicians out there, pulls out a piece of paper, folded up piece of paper of notes, and he's like, this is what these songs are about. The great thing about lyrics is that they're up to interpretation and all this stuff. And what it really boils down to, I think, and this is where I'm going to get super controversial, I think it's a lot easier to blame a bad guy, a boogeyman, on things instead of really looking at what the actual reason for a lot of this stuff is. And I'm not going to get too hardcore to the gun control thing, but I do feel like people that, if they have something in common, like it's really easy for people to obtain firearms and actual like military grade tactical gear and things like that. Like that is the kind of thing that makes these sort of mass shootings possible. But I'm not going to die on that hill tonight and talk about gun control versus non. But what I am saying is that for all of you people that are out there saying that it's metal music and it's video games and it's movies and media or whatever, you're making the exact same argument that the quote-unquote liberals are all making about gun control. But you're turning around and saying that, no, it's not the guns, it's the person, it's the individual. There are tons and tons of responsible gun owners out there and da-da-da-da-da. Okay, that's your argument? There's more people that listen to heavy metal that don't kill people than kill people. There's more people that play video games that don't kill people than kill people. So if we're going to all come together with this idea of we've got sick individuals out there that need help, then that's the approach that we need to take when dealing with these sorts of situations. Because I think we all kind of largely feel the same way. We just can't agree on what bad guy to blame it on. And the only bad guy to blame it on is the person that committed the horrific act.
And then in a weird, twisted sense, we make them celebrities, which I think that's another, go on a bigger tangent about that we people want to be famous for nothing, basically. And I'm not saying killing a bunch of people is nothing. It's the opposite of that. But basically, within 15 minutes, we know who it is. We know we have photos of like their social media that's permeating everything. And it just turns into this thing that we basically... Everyone wants their 15 minutes of fame, and some people are, I'll say, delusional as to how far they're willing to go for fame, for being infamous. I mean, I don't know. There's a lot to unpack there, but I just getting bummed out. Obviously, we've had Tom and Vincent on the podcast. I've spoken to Vincent plenty of times at shows, and I think the thing to me is having, especially with our interview that we did, like you said plenty of times in that intro outro of just how much more nicer, for lack of a better term, Vincent sounds now, more not aggressive and mean sounding. He's sarcastic and he's dry, but that's to be expected.
Yeah, I mean, something that I was hitting on with that interview especially was that obviously, you know, the band's beginnings and Vincent as a person, you know, he was much more negative in the beginning. He was angry about a lot of things, and that's why their older material is still among what I would consider to be some of the most heavy, aggressive music ever released. But then, you know, when he's going on in the interview about positivity and how he's tried to make these lifestyle changes and changes in his life and his way of thinking, it's been enough years for me to see that, you know, and to hear his opinions of things and all that. He's still the same person, but he's a better version of that person. And it's horrible to hear him, especially at this point in time, people taking pot shots at that band and saying that, like, oh, you know, he's like, dude, this dude bought our merch, and he's like, and it makes me sick knowing that he was wearing our stuff. And all that, because he completely missed the point of what they were saying or what they were throwing down. And that's just, this is a person that clearly had issues, and unfortunately we'll never know what those issues were. But these are the acts of an individual, and it doesn't reflect the band shirt that he was wearing, you know?
Right.
I wear a lot of band shirts, you know, I wear Slayer shirts. I don't agree with everything Slayer says, you know, but, like, I guarantee you, man, if I ever, you know, committed suicide or horrible or terrible enough, killed another person, that would become the reason why I did it. You know what I mean? Like, it just that
I would just like to spin that narrative, since, like, you know, like, can you imagine if I, like, went to a metal show or whatever and something happened, and then it's like, oh, guy wearing a Mariah Carey rainbow shirt killed a whole club full of metal people.
Mariah's got a dark side, man. That's got to be the thread that we have to go by.
Yeah, you just don't see that narrative. I guess people, though, don't wear a bunch of pop or hip hop stuff. But all that aside,
This has been Politically Speaking.
Yeah. I just wanted to hit on that because it's been very omnipresent in a lot of the news I'm seeing, and people, you know, giving their 2 cents and so forth. And I really was not a fan of how quickly the headline went from, you know, mass shooting to shooter in the mass shooting wearing a Acacia Strain hoodie, and it's just like, what the fuck, man? Come on.
Yeah.
So all that aside, I know that had nothing to do with our conversation with John from Skillet, but, I think maybe he would share the same sentiments. The whole point of heavy music is to be a release. Music in general is to be a release, not to, and it's a sense of community. That's the thing I think a lot of people would say if you were into heavy music, into metal, that it's a sense of community. It's full of outsiders who don't feel like they belong anywhere until they're in, a club full of people who share those same sentiments. So, but if you would like to keep up with John and Skillet, you can find Skillet on Facebook at Skillet, Instagram and Twitter at Skillet Music. If you would like to follow John, you can find him on Instagram and Twitter at John L. Cooper. And if you'd like to keep up with Metal Nexus, you can find them at Metal Nexus on Facebook, Instagram at metal.nexus, Twitter at metal_nexus, or simply go to metalnexus.net. And if you would like to keep up with Dan, he will tell you where he can be found.
Well, I can be found on Gmail at DiscussMetalDan. You can send me an email and tell me about how everything I said tonight was totally wrong and off base. I look forward to that. Or you can tweet at me at DiscussMetalDan, or you can find me on Facebook under Daniel Terry. Send me a message. We'll talk about it.
And if you would like to keep up with all things this podcast, you can find us simply enough at BrewSpeakPod. Email us at BrewtallySpeaking@gmail.com. Head over to our YouTube channel and check out some of the interviews over there if that's your preferred method. And hit up our Patreon, patreon.com/BrewSpeakPod. And for the Brewtally Speaking Podcast, I am John.
And I am Dan.
We will talk to you all next time.